Welcome to Bat Therapy, the psychology of Batman, superheroes, and other comic book characters. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness. We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown, and comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keeden Hopkins. This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. So this week, we're pretty much continuing our topic from last time to stay in the Halloween-y mood.
It's a sequel.
Sequel, yes. We're going to talk about Glass. So last time we talked about Split from the Unbreakable series, and lo and behold, they had another mental health provider in the sequel.
A psychiatrist, your favorite.
I like psychiatrists. Don't get me in trouble with all the psychiatrists I know. I just think it's kind of strange how everyone seems to choose psychiatrists to do therapy and all this stuff. Like, psychologists exist too, guys. Come on.
I think what it is, I think it's just that in Hollywood, it might be one of those things where it's like, oh, if I say the word psychiatrist, people instantly know.
Maybe, yeah.
It's weird because I feel like the word when you say the word psychiatrist, because that implies a doctorate in there, I feel like they might use it because it sounds more professional than a psychologist, because there's so many
What are you giving me an inferiority complex?
You didn't let me finish. I was gonna say, because there's so many like psychology undergrads out there that are going around being like, I'm a psychologist. And it's like, you're learning about psychology.
So one of Bill's favorite things is to watch my reaction when you're like watching a show or something. And we're watching The Mole right now. And you know that show, do you know what I'm talking about, the show?
Wait, what's it called? Mole Rat?
The Mole. So
The Mole. Yeah,
it's
that one.
people
Okay,
trying to win money, and there's a mole in there who's actually working against them. And there's every now and then shows will have someone who, they think that they understand people to this like huge degree because, I'll have an undergraduate in psychology. You learn a lot of stuff, I'll give you, but it is kind of fun. There's a lot of psychology people out there, I suppose. So okay, fine, we'll give it to the psychiatrists.
I think that's what it is. And also, those of you out there that are majoring in psychology right now for undergrad, you keep up the good work.
Yes,
I am not bashing your major. I'm not bashing your major. I'm just saying it's a lot of y'all, and
there's a lot of us. It's true.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a lot of y'all. So I think that's what it is. I think it's just they say psychiatry and they're like, they don't have to explain anything.
I guess, but when I tell people I'm a psychologist, they seem to understand pretty quickly what that might mean, because they go, oh.
That "oh" could mean so many different things.
It usually means, how far are you looking inside my soul?
Oh. It's like being audited by the IRS, but only in mind. It's like, oh no, she's gonna know all of my websites that I frequent. It's gonna be horrible. She's gonna just figure it out while I'm eating this ham sandwich.
So anyway, we're talking about Dr. Ellie Staple, who is a psychiatrist, as we've been ragging on.
Yes. So this movie, and we'll get into it more later on, it gave me a phobia that I did not know I had.
Spoiler alert.
It was a new fear. Because, all right, so we start the movie off, and basically in the first arc, everyone's caught. Like, Mr. Glass has been in jail for like 15 years now, right? Ever since
So this is Samuel L. Jackson, for anybody who it's been a while since you've seen the movies.
Oh yeah, also, if you haven't seen Unbreakable or Split yet, turn this episode off, go watch those, but download this episode so that you can go back and listen to it. You should really see all those movies. They're very good movies. All three of them are. But yeah, if you haven't seen them yet, it's going to be kind of weird. But yeah, Samuel Jackson's character, Mr. Glass, and he in the movie, it's funny, is at one point he goes, first name Mr. last name Glass. And I was like, that didn't sound as cool as I feel like he wanted it to. But but Samuel Jackson made it cool, right?
As he always does.
Yeah. But yeah, he's locked up, and then David Dunn from Unbreakable has been just out here in his green parka, just running around helping people, and he meets up with Kevin Wendell Crumb as the Beast, and they fight it out, and then they get locked up in the same mental institution. Is that
Hmm.
a proper phrase? Mental institution? Is that okay?
So I think it's a psychiatric hospital. Yeah. At one point they call it a psychiatric research hospital, but the sign I don't think includes research, and I don't know of any hospitals being purely research. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
I would, it's a psychiatric hospital. It's a psychiatric facility. Yeah.
Yeah. So all three of them are locked up in here, and Dr. Ellie Staples' whole thing is she is a doctor that specializes in treating people that think they have superpowers, which sounds like a
Hmm.
very a very small group.
Yeah. So she does use the right term. So she talks about she specializes in delusions of grandeur, specifically people who believe they are superheroes. And so there are I mean, I don't usually go around defining different types of delusions, or essentially these tend to be odd beliefs that are stuck. They're not really flexible to information out there. And obviously, this is true of all of us as humans, but kind of taking things to the extreme. And so you might have someone who thinks they're Jesus Christ, for example, or some other famous figure or well known figure. Or they might believe that they're in charge of something great. And so the terms used, yeah, make sense. But you're right. I mean, she would be like a very hyper focused specialty here. I
Yeah.
mean, she's only got these three people to work with, essentially.
And well, and on top of that, it's like, oh, I specialize in people who think they're superheroes. Well, then should Mr. Glass be one of your patients? Because he simply believes in the existence of them. He knows that he's not a superhero. Like,
Well, he believes he's a super villain.
okay, yes, that's true.
So she needs
That's
to
true.
expand her supers a little bit, I guess.
I feel like in the world of superheroes, though, it's way easier to be a super villain than it is to be a superhero. Like a
Mm,
superhero is like, man, you're just saving dozens and dozens of people at the time, right? A super villain, you only have to do one really bad deed and you make the cut, right? Like it's not, you don't have to
yeah.
be a repeat offender. You can just do one really bad thing and it's like, well, yeah, he's in there,
Yeah, I
right?
suppose that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell people about your new phobia.
Oh God. Okay. So her whole idea is convincing these people they're not actually superheroes. And basically because we've seen these characters and know there is something supernatural to their abilities, she's gaslighting them. And there's nothing more there's something extremely terrifying about a therapist that is gaslighting you. Like I
Oh
cannot
yeah.
imagine how horrible that would be. Like I go in, my mind's already in a bad place. I sit down to talk to the therapist and they're like, "Yeah, none of this is real.
Yep.
You're completely off the deep end even though you're this is the wrong phrasing for it. Even though you're not crazy,
Mhm.
you're not insane, you're not psychotic, you actually do have these things going on and they're just there to like shaking their head no at you like nope, that's not a thing. And I
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
I rewatched this movie I was like Jesus Christ, that would be such a horrible place to be in. Like you're breaking down everything you're going through to a therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist in this
Mhm.
case, and they're just like, yeah, no, you're no, none of that's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a quote in there, and I didn't write down who said it because apparently I'm stupid. But there was a
What?
quote. There was a quote that I thought coined that really well, and is also something really important to just I think consider when you're providing treatment, but also just generally in life. The quote is everything extraordinary can be explained away, and yet it is still true.
I loved that quote.
Right?
I think it's Mr. Glass that
Is
says it.
it? I couldn't remember. Yeah, I didn't write it down.
I
I
want to
wrote the
say it's
quote
him that
down.
says it.
It's such a wonderful quote because I mean, it hits on so many different things. It hits on why we can look at some, like you were saying, okay, you don't even have psychosis. Well, if you have psychosis, you might kind of see it in this way of, hey, something can be extraordinary and people have how do you tell the difference between what's real and what's not real? Perception is actually a fairly fragile thing. It's why when something skirts against our sense of reality, we dig our heels in. And
Well,
it's
right. Yeah.
it's also why when people don't fit inside our boxes, we fight against it. We try and shove them into those boxes that we understand. And, it's led to some extraordinary people being treated really, really poorly. Yeah, we're comfortable with the known.
Yeah, that just reminds me. There was one time I had a student, and they were entering into like a national contest, and they were like, "I don't know why I'm entering. I'm not
Mm,
gonna win." And I'm like, "I mean, you could." And they're like, "Oh, but there's so many people entering. Like, what are the chances I'm gonna win?" And I'm like, you know, it could happen. I was like, the very first race you won, you had 100 million to 1 odds, and here you
there you
are,
go.
right? And so but that it made me think of that when I heard that quote, because
Hmm.
I just, this movie had like a couple things that just stick with you, and it's like, oh wow, I really like that, because Mr. Glass is not a good person at all.
It's so intriguing though because he's not a good person. But the reason for it is he really wants superheroes to be around. But because he really wants superheroes, he also then wants supervillains because he
Right.
recognizes just how one grows the other into
Yeah.
existence.
Yeah, he essentially made both of them, and so
Yeah.
he's really digging his feet in. And one of the really cool things is you find out over the past like so many years, he's been pretending to take his medication and
Hmm.
not really taking it, and just putting on this act. And that was one of the things that I was going to ask you about,
Oh, jeez.
because when you're dealing with patients and they're seemingly just telling everything and talking to you about things, how do you see through the BS, if you will, right?
Yeah,
Like, because
yeah,
how
yeah.
many times is someone telling you something? It's like, I don't think you're telling the truth. Because I feel like we might have brought it up last week when we were talking about Split, how she immediately noticed that
Oh,
Kevin,
right. Yeah.
like, that like the one of the other personalities was pretending to
Yeah.
be someone else, right?
Yep. So and I know that this is where you're coming from, but just to make sure everybody who might be listening is also on the same page. This is not a I have a mental health condition specific kind of thing and therefore I'm cagey or I lie or what. It is the human condition that we are not we're usually not naturally inclined to be telling the whole truth about everything for a variety of different reasons. There can be a lot of different motivators. Some of them are manipulative and cagey and cruel, and then other ones are self-protective or because of fear or embarrassment or other things. There's a whole variety of reasons, and sometimes we don't even realize we're not telling the truth. So like we were talking about before, I mean, your perceptions of reality, this movie does a really good job of just showing, even you as someone watching can say, okay, well, she's saying all of these things about how you could see this from a different angle, where maybe these are extraordinary feats, but not necessarily superhuman. And it's amazing just how things can kind of morph. So, yeah. So in general, okay, how do I kind of look at that? It's funny because when I was in training, you do an internship year when you become a clinical psychologist to kind of round things out. And I remember one of the things that I told a supervisor there was, I need help making sure that I don't just believe everything someone's telling me.
Yeah.
I tended to be someone who took people at their word and just kind of took that as 100%. And that wasn't meant maliciously. It wasn't, I know people are lying to me, I need to catch it. But you're actually not completely helping someone if you're not helping them breach those uncomfortable truths that they may be aware of but are holding back, or they might not even be aware of. And you're helping to bring to the surface. So there it can be small things, a person kind of fudging why they're late to appointments. It can be bigger things. It can be someone completely creating a story, or an event that didn't happen or happened a completely different way. So what do I look for? I think, I think some of the things are just kind of just like anyone would do, inconsistencies, things that don't quite add up to 2 + 2 = 4. Um, so for example, one of the little ones where it's kind of running late. Oh, I was running late today. Things were all over the place, but they've been late every single week. It's like, okay, well,
Right. It's like,
there's something
your
else.
life is your life all over the place because
Which,
maybe
by the way,
yeah,
is important to talk about. And so
yeah,
I think a lot of times we think of bringing the truth out as, oh, you're catching someone, or, oh, punishment, or in
yeah,
therapy, it's more about, hey, I I want to throw something out to you. Here's one thing that came up over here that you mentioned, and here's this other thing. And I don't know, it just kind of struck me that they don't really kind of line up together. What are your thoughts? It's not it's not I'm catching you and getting in trouble. It's more of a, hey, it seems like we're missing some information here. Let's explore this a little bit more and see if there's something there.
it's
So yeah, just looking for those kind of oddities or things that don't line up over time.
I've had that conversation so many times with students
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
where they have whatever excuse for not turning something in,
Uh-huh.
and I simply want to have a conversation with them about it, and they instantly
Yep.
are like, is this an interrogation? What's happening here? And I'm like, I just want to help you plan better. Like, I
Yep.
just
Yeah.
I just want to make sure you're everything's okay. But they're
Mhm.
like, he's trying to catch me lying. You know what? I took a picture of my dead pet. Here he
Oh
is.
god.
And this that has happened. It was weird.
Sad.
I know. I was like, no, I completely believe that you lost your pet. I just want to make sure you're okay and let's figure some things out here. But
Mhm.
they ended up telling me they had had very bad experiences in the past with teachers
Mm.
not believing them. And I'm like, I don't really, I mean, if you're turning in a paper a day late, if you learn the information, that's really what I'm
Yeah.
concerned with.
Hey,
But
I've had times where I told people, and this came, you have to pick your timing right, and I totally agree that as a teacher you'd have some very similar parallels in what you do. I've had times where I've literally told someone like, I can tell there's a lot going on. Da, da, da. I just don't believe you. Or
yeah,
you and I both know that's BS. We know what you're saying is bullshit, right? And you have to have, the timing has to be right. Your approach has to be right based on, my personality as a therapist, my relationship with them, how they tend to hear things. Some people need some humor, some people need it just straight to the point. There's a lot of variability in how you can deliver the message, but exactly that, where a lot of times I think people, um it's kind of the layers. You get these layers
yeah.
of things that aren't quite the truth, and if you can't get to really the truth underneath it all, then you're just working off of all these half truths, and things aren't going to line up right. So a lot of times if things aren't going the direction they need to go, it's a sign that, okay, we haven't really gotten to the true core of something. And so we gotta break things up a little bit and see, hey, is your perception or my perception, or we're not getting to the core truths of something.
And that's what made this movie so interesting because throughout you're thinking it's Dr. Ellie Staples that's trying to get to the core and
Yep.
find the truth,
Mm-hmm.
when in reality, it's been Mr. Glass this entire time trying to get to the bottom of
Yep.
things and
Yep.
find the truth because something else is at play. And I just, the way that it's executed is such a brain scramble. It's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of fun the way they do it.
And the interesting thing is some of the reasoning behind their very opposing sides is the same. So just like we were talking earlier about how Mr. Glass, he really wants superheroes and therefore he really wants supervillains. So he wants these super people to exist. Well, on the flip side, you have Dr. Staple, who actually says to Bruce Willis's character, the overseer, and I forget what his common name is, but
David Dunn.
thank you, David Dunn. She actually apologizes to him at the end as he's like dying. So thanks for all the help, lady. But still,
I'm so mad.
She apologizes to him and essentially she says, I don't have problems with you, but when you exist, essentially his counterbalance also exists. And so the very same kind of underpinnings of when you have superheroes, you have supervillains, draws her to some very different motivations and actions compared to Mr. Glass, which I find really interesting.
Well, and that was one thing too that made it all the more interesting as well. She went to them and told them all as they were dying, "You're not crazy. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
This does exist." Like, she even tells Mr. Glass, she's like, "I want you to die knowing that you were absolutely right
Yeah.
about all of this," because she thought that she had foiled his plan.
Yep. Yeah. It'd be interesting living in her shoes because it seemed like she was both proud of what she was doing or felt it was necessary, and at the same time there was no reason to it didn't seem like she was maliciously telling them, hey, you were right. It seemed like she was trying to comfort them.
Right. And yeah, and that's exactly what it was. Like, she comforted them at the end. Like, she did. Like, she actually, I mean, very sincerely lets them know, like, yeah, we're gonna kill you, but here's the reason why. You're
Yeah.
not crazy. All of these things do exist. Deuces. And part of that makes it even worse because it's like you can just, as someone's dying, just tell them this the way that you say, "Hey, that'll be $8.99 for that chicken McNugget," right? Like, it's just like, how often is she going around doing this? And what's even stranger about it is throughout the movie she was feeding into the fact that they had superpowers while at the same time saying they didn't, because she had all of their rooms built specifically to counteract their powers. David Dunn's room was full of water hoses to spray him.
Now with his, at least, she claims that it's essentially to try and help him overcome his fear of water, essentially a really
That's true.
terrible flooding
Yeah.
experience. So flooding is essentially in order to get over a phobia, which, Keeden, I'm not necessarily suggesting for your new phobia that you gained from this movie, but in order to get over a phobia or an anxiety, really the best thing to do is to face it. And so let's say you have a fear of heights. Well, going and doing stuff where you deal with heights. And so there are kind of two routes you can go. One, Keaton's shaking his head. So one way is you can kind of do a stepwise or gradual exposures, graduated exposures, where you do it one step at a time. Okay, what's kind of a first step to get me there? You might just look at pictures or videos of heights, or you might picture yourself in a place with heights versus going to the highest peak of whatever. Flooding would be just go straight to that highest peak and you stay there until you feel okay. So she's essentially trying to flood out of him, or she claims she's trying to flood him with this so he's no longer afraid of the water, no longer has this kind of misconception, and essentially flooding for the kind of fear and essentially reality testing. Hey, look, you're still fine. You're responding to water like you would expect a person to, when in reality she is actually trying to keep his superpowers at bay. So yes, you're right. They do set up the rooms, but man, she's tricky about her explanations for it.
Yeah, and it's so weird. She does all of her work in this bright pink room, and like everything in the room is just this solid color. And I don't know if that was just something where it was like just for the movie, or I mean, there was a very Dolores Umbridge feel to that pink room. I was like, I don't like this at all. The thing is with her, she's essentially working for a super secret evil organization
Mm-hmm.
that just goes around keeping under wraps that there are people with super abilities, and it
Yeah.
makes you think about, like, wow, like it's really one of those movies where it makes you think about, oh wow, what conspiracies are out there that are like genuine that we don't really know about. And I thought about that for about 5 seconds before I thought about how horrible it is that someone could be sitting down with a therapist that's there to help them, that's just gaslighting them the
Yeah.
entire
Yeah.
time.
And an unfortunate thing is that therapists are people too. I mean, that part's not unfortunate, but what I mean with that is, you know what? There are I've worked with people, or I've had friends, or people who talk to me about having a therapist that they said, I told them about abuse that happened and they didn't believe me. Or just having this sense of, I would talk to them and they just didn't really seem to believe my point of view, or empathize with my point of view, and things that obviously are not to this extent where you're actively manipulating someone. But there are these experiences people have that kind of touch on this gaslighting component, whether the therapist is meaning it purposefully or not. And unfortunately, it does happen. There are times where people aren't believed, and you know what they're talking about is true. It happens a lot of, I mean, it can happen for anybody, but some of the things that seem to make it a little bit more difficult to connect with a therapist, and there might be more of this potential, is, let's come back to psychosis. So if you have someone who, I like to a lot of times think of delusions when it comes to psychosis, like you have a puzzle and you're putting this puzzle together. And at a certain point, our minds will just naturally start filling in the picture of the puzzle. And your mind might not be entirely right. And as you fill it in, it corrects its image for what the puzzle is. Well, I kind of like to explain, when someone has delusions or these like odd fixed beliefs, their brain fills in the puzzle picture a lot faster before they have enough puzzle pieces to really kind of nail down the picture. And when you add more puzzle pieces, the brain's not able to adjust the picture. It's stuck with what it first had, what it first came up with. And so when you're working with someone like this, sometimes unfortunately, providers might start not believing things that are true. So they might have trouble knowing, okay, when is this a belief that lines up with reality versus when is this psychosis. Other times is when someone might have a lot of extreme emotions that happen for them, when they have trouble with just really, really intense feelings of emotion they have trouble controlling. A lot of times those folks might also have times where their providers, they struggle to find a provider that seems to really be able to relate and see reality that they're experiencing. There are just some unfortunate times where I think more therapists can really struggle to relate. And unfortunately, what can happen is something unfortunate that kind of gets touched on similar to this, but obviously this movie's way more in the extreme.
Right. Gosh, I need to watch it again, because the very first time I saw this movie, when they killed off David Dunn's character, I checked out of the rest of the movie. I'm like, I don't care
Mm.
what the point is. I don't care about the plot. I'm angry. You killed off the good guy, and I hate movies that kill off the good guy. Like, that was the attitude I had with it. When I watched it the second time, I was amazed. Like,
Oh.
I knew like what was coming, and that was gonna suck. But then when I took it all in as a whole, I was like, man, that was actually really beautiful how this all went. I had a mindful moment.
You accepted the reality of what the movie was going to bring you, and you were
Yes,
able to take in something new from that.
yes, absolutely. Do we have a mindful nerd moment for today?
Of course we do. I actually, I came up with this before you let me know about your your phobia, your new phobia that you have formed. So I was actually thinking that we could focus in on David Dunn, or the Overseer, Bruce Willis's character, for anyone who needs help with, okay, who played what character. And I was just picturing what this experience would be like for him. So him in particular, I mean, the same happens for the Beast and the I don't know what to call it. Kevin, essentially our person that has dissociative identity disorder, and kind of which personality is at play depends on the timing. But so they also start questioning, but really David Dunn seems to be the one they hone in on, really starting to change his beliefs about himself because of Dr. Ellie Staple. And so I was thinking about, what could you do for David Dunn in these circumstances when, I would just imagine, first off, it took a lot for him to take on this persona. Watch Unbreakable. It's so good. So Unbreakable hits on just how much it takes for him to truly take on this persona. And then 15 and such years later, here he is being asked to question all that again. And I was just thinking about how off balance you could become with all of this going on. And so I wanted to come up with a mindful nerd moment that when we are having to face questioning our reality and what is real, what is not real, it can be so disorienting. It's important to explore those things. Life is not black and white. We need to be able to explore those things, but we also need to be able to, put one foot in front of the other, have some semblance of a foundation under us. The instability that can come from these questions can just be a lot. So I wanted us to do some progressive muscle relaxation, which I can't remember if we've done any of that before. So what I essentially wanted to do was say, okay, there's a lot of these unknowns happening. You're probably just feeling all over the place. What's something that feels more physically concrete that you can connect to? And so I wanted to do something that kind of hits on the body and feeling more connected to your physical body that might help reduce some of that just disorientation that might happen with all this questioning going on. So that's what I was kind of picturing here. So, as we have been doing, I will ask you if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If not, you can just soften your gaze, not looking at anything in particular. And before we go into this scene, so once again, we're going to be pretending we're David Dunn or Bruce Willis's character. And, let's say that Dr. Ellie Staple, we're sitting with her in her office, Dr. Ellie Staple in her pink office that Keeden's a fan of. And we're going to be practicing this exercise together. But first, let's just take a few breaths. Not worrying about breathing in any particular way, just using your breath to kind of focus in. And as you're breathing, put yourself into David Dunn's shoes, so to speak. Pretend you're David Dunn. You're sitting in Dr. Ellie Staple's pink office. And she's been talking to you about different factors to question what you thought was real all these 15 years. It took so much for you to accept the fact that you have these extreme invulnerabilities, except with water, that you're able to do all of these incredible feats. And you're getting really overwhelmed. And honestly, you're starting to not know which way's up. And so what you do is you're still sitting in the room with her, but you just take a moment to check in with yourself internally. And first what you do is you tense up, you crunch up your toes, curl your toes up with your feet, tense them up a little bit, enough to just feel that tension, not enough to hurt yourself, and then release that tension. Noticing that difference between the curling up the toes and release. And then just subtly, you're not trying to pull attention from Dr. Staple, but you hold some tension, you kind of flex your calves. Feel some tension in the lower parts of your legs. And then release that. Notice what that feels like. And then once again, just small little movements. You tense up your thighs, your legs, kind of tensing them together a bit. Noticing that tension and then releasing it, noticing those physical differences. Then you tense up your chest, squeezing your stomach a bit, just feeling that tension in the core, the torso of your body, and then releasing it, noticing that shift in tension. And then you take your arms and you just stretch them slowly, not in any way that Dr. Ellie Staple is going to worry too much about, but kind of in a little stretch, reaching your hands out in front, moving your head around on your neck, just kind of allowing yourself to tense up your arms and your shoulders and your neck a little bit, moving things around, and then releasing that and noticing that difference in tension. And then you just sit with that for a moment and just feeling that groundedness of being connected to your physical body, that tense and release that you've had. And you take a deep breath, breathing in, breathing out, and you continue your conversation with Dr. Staple. So now that we've done this exercise with David Dunn, we're going to shift back to who we are in the podcast. So first, though, just kind of do another kind of movement with your body wherever feels good. You can do a little bit of tense and release, just like we were doing before, but this time you're shifting back into you. You're no longer Bruce Willis. I'm sorry. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and we will finish the podcast. How was the progressive muscle relaxation?
I liked it. One of the things it made me immediately think about, it made me go back through all of the different mindfulness exercises that we've done and how I feel like each one of them always focuses on a specific sense. And this one was more about touch than the others. And so I really like that, because with the movie Glass, it's one of those things where it feels like you're constantly dealing with somebody that does not have control of all of their senses, but definitely has control of some of them. And so it's really cool that mindfulness, you can kind of decide like what you want to hyper focus on in the event that you may not have one of your other senses.
It's a very good point. And, the different senses can pull for different things. And some people might prefer some to others. I really like touch and the physical movement and things like that. Other people might prefer using their imagination, or they might enjoy sight, or maybe you have someone who really connects with taste. Or you're so right. The different senses and how to connect to those, and just kind of figure out how to have control over what you're focusing on and how you focus on it.
Yeah. I had a quote from the movie that I really, really liked, and I guess we can close this out. Elijah Price, aka Mr. Glass, says, "I believe that if everyone sees what just a few people become when they wholly embrace their gifts, others will awaken. Belief in oneself is contagious."
Oh, that's beautiful.
Right? I love that. Thanks for nerding out with us.
I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown. Find me on social media at Crafting the Mind.
And I'm comic enthusiast and professional nerd Keeden Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JBS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. See you next week, same bat time, same bat channel.